Morgan Parker is a man on a mission to ride his motorcycle from Hong Kong to Brisbane, Australia on a voyage that will see him travel through 10 countries and in the process raise awareness about 10 of the most important charities across the region. It's an adventure that'll test his limits during a trip that'll be exciting, dangerous, eye-opening and always breathtaking. Join him each week as he travels wheel to wheel. After an action-packed trek through Thailand, we join Morgan now as he enters Malaysia, the 7th country on the wheel-to-wheel charity expedition.
After so many remote and unpredictable border crossings, riding from Thailand into Malaysia barely raised my heartbeat. The sophisticated infrastructure was an early indicator of what Alan and I would come to experience throughout this highly developed modern country.
No problems at all going across into Malaysia. Alan was with me. It was his first border crossing, so that was an interesting time for him. He was a bit nervous about it all, much like I was getting from Hong Kong into China.
Riding the smooth roads, we carved our way through the forests to the lesser populated eastern states and experienced every imaginable climatic condition. The treacherous, wet and winding road through the Cameron Highlands provided some of the best riding of the entire expedition. And wherever we could, we went off-road. Although Alan's bike wasn't exactly suited for it, we still had an awesome time exploring the mountain trails. After an epic 17-hour day adventuring, we powered along the main highway into Kuala Lumpur. KL is a buzzing urban metropolis, and we made the most of it.
KL's one of those cities that has got a real blend of old and new. You see the mosques and the old Chinatown and little streets, but then you also see this increasing prevalence of beautiful, modern, architecturally designed buildings. Has really developed into a remarkable city.
The next morning, we went to visit the BMW group in Malaysia.
All the way through the expedition, where possible, I've been linking up with other BMW riders, and in some cases lucky enough to actually link up with BMW Motorrad, the company and the proper riding group. And Malaysia was an example where that riding group really came out to support wheel-to-wheel in a big way. And we had a fantastic ride from Kuala Lumpur out to Genting Highlands one day. And the president of the group there took us on a wonderful scenic route. Those guys really know how to ride those bikes, and they know those roads like the back of their hand.
About an hour outside Kuala Lumpur, the highlands are thousands of feet above sea level, with a scenic view to match. At the top is a fully fledged casino and amusement park, but there was no time for that as we were on our way to another scenic highlight. Our next destination was a place known as Batu Caves.
We've ridden out here to Batu Caves on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia with the BMW Motorcycle Owners Club. Now this location is extremely important to the Hindu devotees. Every January or February, 1.5 million devotees come out here, climb up this flight of stairs to pay homage.
And then one more surprise stop, a visit to the home of Manesh Doshi, president of the BMW Motorrad Owners Club. It was amazing.
I didn't know what to expect. I really had no idea who he was. And it turns out that he's a very successful businessman and he has a palatial mansion on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur. You know, he has a fair collection of BMW motorbikes, and it was much like being a kid in a candy store when I turned up and I saw how beautifully prepared they were. So how has this come to be?
I bought my first BMW in 2007.
Right.
And then it's just been love riding them.
You know, is there a favourite amongst all these bikes?
Well, they're all favorites, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose the GS Adventure.
Yeah, my next bike.
Yeah, good choice.
And when Wheel to Wheel returns, we'll venture back to KL to visit Women's Aid Organisation, the real reason we're here, to discover how they're tackling one of Malaysia's most serious issues, violence against women. Shocking, shameful statistics. I had no idea the problem is so grave and so widespread. Domestic violence is defined as physical, sexual, verbal, or economic abuse for the sake of power and control. Here in Malaysia, Wheel to Wheel wanted to create greater awareness of the issue. So we're working with the Women's Aid Organisation in Kuala Lumpur.
For me personally, I have a cousin that was murdered in a domestic violence situation 4 years ago in October. So obviously that's an issue and a cause for me that resonates on quite a personal level.
We were always determined to tackle the issue of women's rights and equality. Finding the Women's Aid Organisation really enabled us to capture the full depth of this complex matter. Despite Malaysia's economic prosperity, violence against women remains a prolific, yet hidden, national crisis. For many years, the Women's Aid Organisation has been fighting for social change, while providing shelter and counselling for victims. We visited them to learn more.
In 1982, when the shelter was opened, many people told us that Malaysian men do not beat their wives. And this shelter, this refuge, you know, you'll close it down, for sure. 28 years later, we're still here.
Since its inception, Women's Aid Organisation has been instrumental in advocating women's rights, having laws passed outlawing domestic violence, providing sanctuary at their refuge, and offering counselling and support to women and children trying to rebuild their lives.
Beginning, there was the refuge. That's the heart of the centre, the shelter. Then we set up the childcare center, the second center. We now have a third center known as the WAO Center, where we do the fundraising, the public education, the legal reform, and so on. This is the counseling room. And in fact, right now there's a counseling going on, face-to-face counseling. So for women who don't need shelter, or they don't want to have telephone counseling, but they want to see a social worker, a one-to-one, that goes on here. And so we need to keep our voices down because there's a woman right in there who's receiving counseling.
113 women sought shelter here last year alone, and each one has a horrific story. Tales of being hung upside down and beaten, raped and more.
We actually came across a client who, when the husband actually found her outside after she has left him, he grabbed her, dragged her back home, beat her up severely and gave her several options. Was that either she drank a type of poison or she accepted him stabbing her somewhere or coming back to him. So in light of all the options that he gave her, she actually chose to drink the type of poison he gave her, and she did.
It's a tragic story, but unfortunately all too common, not only in Malaysia, but globally.
It is understood globally that for every one report, 9 go unreported.
Well, I don't think it's just Malaysian men. I think domestic violence is a very genuine, legitimate concern all over the world. But I think in terms of the situation in Malaysia, it's mostly a combination of social perception, culture, as well as religion put together. And there's also the whole concept and idea of power and control. And we live in a society where only like about less than 20 years ago, we actually recognized domestic violence as a form of crime.
One such local case is that of Ellie, a woman who was subject to verbal abuse, then violent physical abuse at the hands of her husband. Like many, her tale was one of love at first.
I met him the place where I worked, the same office. Then we, as a colleague, and we get to know her, and he proposed me and we got married.
But as time went on, Ellie ignored the danger signs.
He's a very caring person and very loving person. And he loved me so much. Very possessive. Possessive in the sense of beginning I didn't know, because possessiveness, I feel like, wow, he loved me, only me, no one else.
Then one day, her husband hit her.
And the first time he slapped me 8 times continuously in one side of my left-hand side. He's using his right hand to slap me. And I was so shocked because it's the first ever he hit me, which is I really couldn't accept it.
And then a familiar pattern emerged. Communication between husband and wife ceased and the violence got worse.
And he just dragged me, he shut my mouth and pushed me down and kicked my stomach and kicked me. It's like just closed the door and he started to kick me like he became very, very wild. He just kept on hitting me.
Fearing for her life and that of her children, Ellie sought help from the Women's Aid Organisation.
The reason that most women find themselves unable to leave their domestic violence situation is because they're terrified of losing their children. And a lot of them calls us and say, you know, he says he's going to take away my children if I leave him, so I can't leave him. So if they are in need of shelter and they have children with them, we usually would take the women and the children in together.
Unfortunately, children often get caught up in this cycle of violence. At the childcare centre, they are taught how to interact positively so they don't repeat the cycle.
We try to teach them that there's a way without being aggressive, without beating each other, without yelling at each other, just to talk. And actually it's working for 15 kids in this house. It's working very well right now.
So what more can be done? There's an important role for men to play to stop the violence.
Public education is critical. And it's really important for women to understand that this is not their fault, that it is a chosen action by a man when he chooses to beat his wife, to rape his daughter, to beat his sister or his mother, it's a chosen action. It's not something that happened, spontaneously, because it's planned, because men need to come out and stand up against other men to say this kind of behavior, it's unacceptable.
We can also support this vital work through donations. WAO does not receive any government assistance and is entirely funded by public and corporate sponsors.
We want to change the world, really. We just want to make it safer for women. We want gender equality. We believe that men and women are equal. It's as simple as that. Eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. It's not only about violence against women. I often say that the home can be the most dangerous place. The home is supposed to be the safest space.
And to those who are witnessing or experiencing violence in their own homes, here are some final words of advice.
What I can say is, don't show violence to a woman. You are not a man if you show violence to a woman. If you want to be a man, you have to secure them and give them the best. I want another woman to be benefited. All right. And through my stories, I want other women not to be keep quiet. Go and get all these kind of advices. Get a better life. Because life is short. You must make it happy. You are supposed to live, not to die.
It's advice worth heeding. And though we may be leaving the shelter, we continue to support the cause. When Wheel to Wheel returns, we join a bike rally in support of the Women's Aid Organisation. Up bright and early, our goal is to lead a bike rally for the Women's Aid Organisation throughout Kuala Lumpur. We were delighted to have an entourage of Harley-Davidson riders join us.
Oh, what a ride. We're here in Putrajaya, the new administrative centre of Malaysia, just outside of KL. Alan and I have been joined by 10 people riding Harley-Davidson, the ladies of Harley and the Harley owners group. Fantastic ride, love riding with these guys. It's like having a permanent police escort, having the Harleys out front, stopping traffic, letting us through. It's absolutely brilliant.
It's fitting today that we've come out to Putrajaya, the capital, the administrative capital of Malaysia, because a lot of the issues that Women's Aid Organisation are campaigning for will ultimately require changes here. Changes in government, in legislation, changes to the justice system. I think it ties in very nicely, and on top of that, it was a beautiful ride with some of our local friends.
Going out to Putrajaya was a particular thrill because 15 years ago, when I first moved up to Asia, I was invited there to have a look at what was being planned, and I remember clearly that my boss was telling me at the time, oh, this is never going to happen. It was just a huge field with nothing out there. Now, of course, going back 15 years later and there's these huge buildings everywhere, and that vision that they had has become a reality. So it just goes to show what Malaysia can do.
Imagine what more could be achieved by applying that vision and drive towards social change and ending violence against women. We concluded the ride with a reception for the assembled media, a final chance to get the message out.
Welcome, Wheel to Wheel. The money that we are raising from this event will be used for a legal aid fund.
Thank you, Ivy, and thank you to Women's Aid Organisation for firstly existing and continuing to bring awareness to these issues. It's no good to have beautiful buildings, beautiful roads and bridges if people don't have rights and justice and equality.
I was a keen advocate for the work of Women's Aid Organisation and did all I could via newspaper interviews and via radio interviews.
The Millennium Development Goals, as espoused by the United Nations, considers this one of the top 8 issues facing the planet today. So we were very happy to find an organisation as well run as the Women's Aid organisation and dealing with it so effectively here in Malaysia.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
It was time to say goodbye, and I had to start thinking about leaving Malaysia. It would be the first water crossing I would make during this expedition, and it was a day I'd been thinking about for over a year.
I tell you, as comfortable as I had become with water crossings are a whole nother matter. They are tricky. And this one, the first one, was not only a water crossing, it was also a border crossing. So it was a double whammy.
While one operator rejected me out of concerns for my safety, another decided to take me on. We rode to Port Dickson, but despite all the support, to say that I had trepidations about my ferry crossing was an understatement. Things just didn't go as planned.
Loading that bike on was the crane that was supposed to lift the bike up and put it onto the ferry. It was there, but the operator wasn't. And no one could find this guy, and the boat needed to leave. So the captain of the ferry took matters into his own hands, went and got the keys for a piece of earth-moving equipment, a bulldozer with a bucket on it, and he brought that over to the side of the ferry on the docks and lashed a rope around the bucket and then put it around the belly of the bike, and boom, up she went and dropped it on. Only a little bit of plastic broke on the bike. I thought, oh, this is going to be a disaster. But improvisation, we got it on, and off I was to Indonesia and Sumatra.
On our final night in Malaysia, I reflected on our intense experiences in this country, as well as preparing to say goodbye to Alan, my riding partner for the last 20 days.
Well, what a surprise packet Malaysia's ended up being in two important ways. One, Women's Aid organisation has turned out to be just amazing. After spending a couple of days with Ivy and the team, I feel like I really get what they're fighting for. This violence against women, which was so alien to me before, I now understand just how universal this problem is. These guys need support. The second big surprise in Malaysia has been the phenomenal motorbike riding that Alan and I have enjoyed, courtesy of the Harley-Davidson Club and the BMW Club. Boy, oh boy, we were spoiled.
Just speechless, really. What a great experience it's been riding with Morgan. 3 weeks and 5,000 kilometres on the road together. Morgan, you've still got another 50 days ahead of you.
Yeah, mate.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, it has been awesome.
Yeah, put it there.
Yeah.
And now it's time to get the bike and myself across to Sumatra, which is just basically due west of here, not far.
On the longest part of his expedition, Morgan will be severely tested on Indonesia's dangerous roads. Perilous conditions, volcanoes, orangutans, and the devastation of Sumatra's rainforests are just a few of the ingredients in next week's episode of Wheel to Wheel. For more information, please visit wheeltowheel.tv.